Hello, everyone. My name is Will Munroe. I'm the VP of Marketing at RangeForce. Thank you very much for joining us for our walkthrough today entitled Optimizing Defensive Readiness through Cyber Range, Blue Team, and Red Team Exercises. Today, we're going to spend a little time talking about the world of team training for your cybersecurity and broader cybersecurity and IT team. Talk about cyber range technology, of which RangeForce, of course, provides a solution. And we'll also go into a little bit about what our solution does and how you run one of these exercises and the value you get from it. First, let's set the stage. Something we all know. We're spending a lot of money on cybersecurity tools today, and yet the bad guys seem to have the upper hand. Something that you might not have thought about. Team training for your cybersecurity team is critical because Blue Team Defense is a team exercise. It requires multiple people in multiple roles who can go through and understand and detect an indicator of compromise, contain that attack, will determine if it's real, contain that attack, and try to minimize the damage of that attack. And the best way to train for that is in a live fire, real world environment. And yet today, very few people practice that way. You can see a Ponyman report just looking at blue and red team exercises. The majority of people rarely or never do this sort of training. And when you peel back the onion on that quarterly and regularly and annually, that's often just a very simple individual competition and not really team training. It's not surprising the technologies really fall short for creating an environment where a cybersecurity manager or a CISO could put their team through this type of training. The fact is, on-site ranges that are around today, and we're going to talk about the types and we're going to talk about how they work, they're very expensive. They're limited to on-site, which within our COVID-19 world is problematic. They require a lot of overhead to operate, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that overhead exists, what it consists of, and how it's difficult to do. They're not often reusable, meaning a lot of times you go in and you do that training and then you throw it away and start over with the next one. And that leads into the second piece, which is because of that, they're not often built into your entire training environment for your cyber pros. So individual training, individual assessments, team training, talk about that too. And then we have cloud-based cyber ranges. And a lot of the cloud-based cyber ranges that are out there are nothing more than single-person event cyber ranges, and that's not really going to help us here. Many of them have very limited environments, and many of them can't scale. Because of that, not a lot of people are doing this training, and yet it's really, really important training. So as we go through this, let's start by setting some terminology, because if you go in and you Google red team, blue team, purple team, red team's getting pretty steady. Blue team, we know. Purple team's new. There's a lot of different answers out there. So let's talk about what they are and what they do, right? A red team's not really a team, unless maybe you've got 3 or 4 folks you've got hired internally that do the red team job, but they don't work as a team. And that's very different than your cybersecurity defenders. Most of the time, these are ethical hackers, pen testers, and they're going through trying to find flaws and weaknesses and vulnerabilities in your real live environment and point them out to you so they can be fixed before the bad guys find them. Your blue team, on the other hand, that's really your security team. So that's easy. And it is, in fact, a team. And they do have to work together, whether it's the people working in your SOC working together to understand an incident and respond to it, whether it's your endpoint or your network people, they all have to work together ultimately to detect and contain a cyber attack. Purple team's a newer idea. And this is the notion of, you know what? I've got pen testers out there who are banging away on my new applications and on my website and all my web-facing things, even my emails, and they might be running phishing attacks. And I've got my blue team inside. Why don't we try to align them to see if we can run some attacks in and see if the team can actually detect them and respond to them? The problem, of course, is that's running in your live environment. And so it really limits what you can do unless you really are crazy. So that's where cyber ranges came from, right? A notion of recreating something very similar to your IT environment with all of the components, but in a safe area where you can do anything in. And that means you can bring those malwares, those vulnerabilities in. You can have multiple stages of attack develop over time and compromise servers and directories and do lateral movement and command and control, and it's all good, right? And it's actually great training for your blue team because now they get to see the full expanse, all the stages of a cyber attack and practice on getting good at it. What's in this cyber range? Well, the really good ones are going to have an IT infrastructure, a network, users, endpoints, a DMZ, all those pieces. They're going to also have security tools. And what you really want is your security tools, or at least some that are very close, so that your operators are practicing in the same tools that they're going to work in their day-to-day world. If you become really good at doing log searching and figuring out how to surface indicators of compromise within your logs, maybe you're bringing in a threat intel tool to help you, and you can practice that in the range. If you're good at it in real life, practice it in the range well, you're going to be great at it. We talked about bringing in malware and vulnerabilities, but there's two other sides to cyber ranges that people don't often think about until they run these exercises. And I certainly am one of those people. Until I was involved in my first exercise back in January, didn't realize this. One of the real big challenges as a cyber range is creating a scenario, a training scenario that's going to be meaningful to your learners. And that means thinking like a hacker and creating that attack, defining the application vulnerabilities you're going to exploit, or maybe it's a phishing email you're going to exploit, but figuring out how that attack vector is going to come in, the systems it's going to compromise, how it's going to move, and what you want your tools to actually pick up from it. And you have to build all that data. And that gets very complicated to not only build, but then to execute in the stages you want and the timing you want in the attack. And yet, if it's done poorly, your team's training is going to be weak from the lack of execution you've built into that model. It becomes time consuming and very difficult to plan. The other side that's challenging is going ahead and running through that exercise and having that timing happen and capture what's happening at each stage so that you can look at it after the fact and report on it. That's also a challenging piece. And then at the end, taking all of that data and bringing it together into a lesson learned that's meaningful. So those are really all of our components. Two of them you may not have really thought much about before, but they end up being very difficult and requiring a lot of overhead. And then types of ranges. So we have on-site and we have cloud ranges, but it doesn't just stop there. You have on-site ranges that are shared, and you might find these, various states and universities have these that you can go out and work in. Our partner Tech Data has a really cool one down in Phoenix that when COVID's over, you can down and run exercises in. And in those ranges, they have a variety of systems and networks set up, a variety of tools. Tech Data has a huge advantage in that they have so many vendor partners that they actually bring in almost every tool you can think about into their range, and that makes it real great training. The challenge with all of the shared ranges is they're single use in the sense that you're going to go in, you're going to build that exercise with whoever the range owner is, you're going to run it, and then they're going to throw it all out and move on to the next person coming in. And so they're not reusable, and that can be real challenging because the next time you go and want to run one, you've got to start all over again. And you need to use these exercises to build on your training, and that's hard to do. So you could get a dedicated one. You could build one yourself. They're very expensive. The numbers range, I'll go into that in the next slide, but the numbers are expensive, but they are reusable and it's yours to use, but they're difficult to manage. And then there's cloud-based cyber ranges. So these are relatively new. We, of course, are one of these vendors. And they're really taking and exploiting the world of emulation and virtualization and the power of environments like AWS to bring very realistic environments to life in a very responsive way. And again, here you have single use where you're going to share that environment in the cloud, use it for an exercise, almost rent it and then tear it down. Or if you can find vendors like this, and we're one, and I'll talk to it, make ones that are reusable where they can create a dedicated environment for you and mirror what you have, and then you can reuse it and even use it for mixed training, meaning not just for blue team exercises, but for testing certain processes, for running playbooks, for even training red team groups. And those are our types of ranges. So what's the power of a cyber range? Most people probably intuitively know this. right? The idea of creating that real world where it's going to feel like a real attack has huge benefits, right? One, if you've got your real tools in there, learning how to operate them and pick out what's real, that's huge. How do the tools, you can also test how the tools work together. Is the data being sent from your endpoint into your SIM or from your backend log into your SIM? Are you getting the right data? Because as the attack unfolds, does the data actually get to your SIM? And you can see that. Running through your playbooks, your response cycles. This is huge. If you've got planned incident response processes, whether they're built in a SOAR tool or whether you run them manually, you can go run through them and see how they work and find the holes and the gaps in them. A big part of it, though, is creating the simulation or simulating the stress, the confusion, and the speed of a real cyber attack. I was reading a great breakdown of a Microsoft ransomware attack on a Microsoft system, not a Microsoft, a ransomware attack on a company in a Microsoft system. And it ended up that the ransomware attack took multiple hours to develop, but the company had no idea it was happening. And by the time the last phase came and the ransomware hit, that was less than 35 minutes. But if they had picked up the indicators of compromise earlier, it was something they could have really stopped. And so having a team that can work together at speed and stay in front of an attack as it unfolds is the best strategy you have for detecting and containing that attack. And these types of blue team exercises are the very best way to build that sort of readiness into your team. You also see who the strong and weak players are in your team and what sort of remediation training they need. And as we just talked about, you're going to build that coordination and that timing. And most importantly, what you want to do is build this into an improving and continuously improving training model. So how do I create a world where I can train and then into my team and then train individuals and then train my team and keep that going around? And I'll speak to that a little more in a second. And a lot of times, and with our customers, we see them using this to build broader security culture. So they'll run an exercise. They'll bring in people from other parts of the organization, IT, app development, DevOps, even marketing and finance, and let them be a part of it so that they begin to understand exactly what cyber attacks are, how damaging they can be. And what we find in our clients is when they go back to their office, their whole culture of security is way improved over before they started, because they really don't understand what it is to work in cybersecurity and what it is to deal with the types of attacks that cybersecurity professionals deal with. But as I alluded to, there's problems, right? There's problems with ranges, and that's why very few people actually take part in a range and doing blue team exercises. Of course, COVID set everyone back. It set us back too. We were doing cyber range, our product is built in a cyber range, and I'll speak to that, but we were doing cyber range exercises on a regular basis with our customers, large blue team exercises, until COVID hit, because we were doing them primarily on site. Just that was the standard. And now that's not working. There's a lot of cyber ranges sitting out there that are empty. But I think in a post-COVID-19 world, being distributed and being able to have team members work at home, even in security, for the cost savings is going to stay. And so therefore, moving forward, how we operate a cyber range is going to have to change, and it's going to have to count for those distributed environments. Cyber ranges themselves are difficult to keep up to date, especially when you're trying to manage your own. As we talked about, it takes a lot of resources to actually plan a good exercise, and even more resources to run and debrief that exercise. Cost-wise, up until now, they've been prohibitive. FSISAC has a wonderful cyber range, great financial services, information threat sharing organization. They stood up a cyber range. It cost them $500,000 that they offer to their folks, and each exercise costs $100,000, $200,000 to put together. That's what I mean by there's a lot of overhead, right? And then finally, the piece on each side I talked about, which is the real goal here isn't just to run a blue team exercise. The goal here is to run individual training, assess your people, run team exercises, assess your people, pick up on your weaknesses, fix those weaknesses, improve the overall readiness of your team to detect and respond to attacks, and to continuously do that. Because we know that the cyber attacks change, the technology you use changes, the types of attacks that they're going to go at, the data they're going to go after, or what they're trying to do, be it ransomware and money, is going to change. And so you have to constantly stay up with that, which means this continuous training environment is critical. So let's talk a little bit about the RangeForce range. And as I talked about, and I'll show in the next slide, we actually started with a cyber range. And our entire platform, we'll call it the basement floor, is built as a cyber range. Our cyber range, what we've had to change, and we launched our Battle Fortress version of the range, which is a distributed version of our core environment that can be done with 40 people working from home, 100 people working from home. So that now you can bring that same blue team exercise into our current, work from home world we have today. And that's what we rebuilt and launched as Battle Fortress back in August. It still uses our very scalable architecture. We bring in real malware, real vulnerabilities. We have a whole library of them that we built, plus we can build them with our customers. We have our infrastructure already pre-built. It looks like a real IT environment with servers and endpoints and desktops and real users, and the thing runs in real time. If you are familiar with our technology and you've just done some of our base individual training, pieces of this range spin up to make that base training work. And so that's why we can give you a very realistic individual training environment. We also do some things that are very different and special. We can emulate tools in the range. We have a variety of tools like Splunk and Recorded Future. I just finished doing Fortinet FortiGate in the range and writing up about that. So we bring a lot of the vendor tools into the range. We also bring a lot of open source tools into the range. And that creates an even more powerful training environment. And then we finally, have a library of different types of attacks. You can see them there. And the idea of a really good exercise in a continuous training model is to start with a relatively simple 1 or 2 stage blue team exercise. And then the next time around, make it a little more complex. And maybe the third time around, start to add in multiple attacks at the same time. So maybe you'll try to distract the team with a DDoS attack on the website while you're doing a SQL injection, which is your true attack. And building that sort of sophistication into your blue team exercises as your team develops their skills is what makes that readiness improve, and even a more sophisticated attack, something that they can actually get out in front of, detect, and contain. If you put that range and plug it back into our overall platform, you can see that, as I said, our base floor is that cyber range. And on top of it sits all of our interactive training capabilities. And some of these are focused on individual training, like the learning goals and the teaching assist, but others are focused on the cyber range, like the training and the dashboards and the team creation. And finally, some are used across both, in this case, the gaming engine and the dashboards. And then finally, at the top level is all of the different types of training we do. So we have individual type training. We have individual challenges, which are individual blue and red team challenges as opposed to team focused challenges. And I know that gets confusing because we misuse the term team, but in one set, you go in and let's say you want to be a penetration tester, and we have a series of harder and harder capture the flags into an environment that the security on it gets better and better as you improve, and you've still got to figure out how to break into it and capture the flag. That's an individual exercise. Or maybe you're going to play the role of a web app developer and the website's been hacked and you've got to go find where the malware is, remove it, patch the system, and that's an individual blue team. And then in the team training is where you're going to bring in different roles. You're going to have your people working in the security operations center. You're going to have your endpoint people, your network people, your control people, even application people that have to patch things. And they're all going to work together to defend against the team exercise. And so how does one look on the team side of the house, right? What we're going to do is work with you, and I'll show you a timeline on this of building out what that exercise is going to look like. We're going to add in the attack vectors, the malware, the vulnerabilities. Learners are going to log into that environment. They're going to be assigned by role to different teams. And then the software emulators will bring the entire system up to life, including your security tools. And everyone's going to be there talking about it and getting briefed on it. And suddenly things are going to start going wrong. And in this case, this is one we run. It's a relatively simple one where we have a phishing attack that comes in, and that malware gets deposited into a mail server. It makes it through into a workstation and finally into a backend database. About that time, Splunk is going to pick it up, and you're going to start to get your first real solid indicators of compromise. When you go do a little bit of research in Recorded Future, in this case, you're going to learn intel about that threat that's attacking you. You're going to find that MS Defender's actually seen it also, but you missed it. And then you're going to go back through, you're going to isolate the endpoints that have it. You're going to update firewall rules. And if you do all that right, you're going to win. If you miss any of those pieces, you're not going to win. And then finally, at the end of the time frame, we'll go through and capture all that data, and we'll sit down and debrief the team, walk through what actually happened to them, what they picked up that they did well on, what they didn't do well on, and build that also into a post-event training plan for that team. We talked about bringing your security stack into the cyber range. Here are the tools that we have in the cyber range. We have training on almost all of these also. So if people need to go in and work on the interface and get stronger at it, we have different levels of training for each of these tools. Most of them, we're rolling them out. And then what we'll do is sit down with you and pick out what's going to be in there and create your stack. And that's what will load into the range at the time of that exercise. The timeline for how these flow. So we're going to sit down with you and start by speccing out what are the goals of the blue team exercise. How do you want it to work? What you want for compromises. We'll look at what we've built already in the library that we need to play, and we'll scope out what needs to get built, including the tools you need. And then it's a 2 to 3 week process to go in, and we'll build that environment. Anything that's not there, we'll build. But we're also going to build playbooks that are going to walk your people through that exercise. And at the same time, you're going to take your people that are going to be in it, and you're going to run them through some training to make sure they're prepared. An important lesson learned in the first couple exercises that I was involved in, we had people on the blue teams that were not up to speed on certain things. I'll give you a very common one. When's the last time anyone in your team went into a Linux command line and actually went down and learned how to find malware buried in there, remove it, and then patch the system or close a back door? And so you may need a little practice on Linux command line, or Microsoft, same idea, right? And so based on the scenario you're going to run, we'll give you some training modules to prep the team so that everyone's up to speed. Because when you run one of these exercises and the team is left behind early in the process, you've taken a lot of time and resources to accomplish very little. You want them to have a real shot at actually, at least some group of them, have a real shot of detecting and containing that attack. The idea here is to build their confidence and build their skills, not show them how bad they are. And then around week 4, we're going to run that attack with you. Over time, as you get better at this, you'll be doing these yourself. We can make this very hands-off, but in the early ones, we like to work with our clients to make sure they understand how to execute them, the training that needs to be involved, the type of people that need to be involved. And then finally, we're going to sit down and do the debrief with you. And we're going to provide the reports you want and the follow-up, as well as the recommendations and training. And if you buy our entire platform, we actually integrate the training people should do right into their learning paths, because we have them integrated together. So that's very powerful. And that begins to build that continuous training model. Let's talk a little bit more about the value you get out of it, a little more about the value from the U point as opposed to the cyber range point, right? We talked about the continuous training. That's a critical part of this. I can't stress that enough. When you build that sort of training model for your cyber pros, you create an environment where they're really going to improve, and you can measure that improvement. And that's not a small thing, right? When you can, as a security manager of a team, or as a CISO or a leader of a security team, when you can say, hey, we ran a series of ransomware exercises and we did this well. Our mean time to detect, our mean time to respond was X and Y. We trained, and then we ran them 6 months later or 8 months later, and we improved Z on each one. That's a measurable reduction of risk and improvement of readiness that you can report up the chain. And that's very important to show how your team is improving. And that is a measure not of tools, but of your team's skills within and beyond those tools, which is a much more important measure. Interestingly enough, a lot of our customers that run these, they find hidden talent. as I said, people use these to build culture and they bring in people from other areas. And it's very common for us to find IT staff that are really amazing analysts, that are amazing investigators, and they have tricks up their sleeve that security team isn't even aware of. And suddenly you find they're on the security team shortly after the exercise. And it's much easier to backfill what they were doing in IT because you found a valuable asset. Of course, continual training means continually honing the expertise of your people, learning to contain and identify new threats. There's, as people get good at this continuous training, we find what we're working on with them is not core skills, but hey, there's a new threat on the horizon for us, or there's a new vulnerability we just found. Let's quickly put together training to make sure we can detect and contain anything related to that new thing. As we talked about, it develops those team skills to a level that right now we don't see in security, yet we need to have. And finally, surprisingly, this is going to reduce your costs dramatically, right? So I won't even get into the costs of avoiding a security breach, right? That's been written about over and over. But if you were doing cyber team exercises before, these are roughly a third of the cost of those, running these sort of exercises. You mix it with our training, that's a third of the cost of sending someone to a SANS class for a week. So there's a huge value improvement here. And if you are a company, and we talked to a lot of these, that you thought running a cyber range or doing a blue team exercise was just way above and beyond anything that you could afford, well, guess what? You can look again now and you should talk to us, because we can do these because there's an economy of scale for us, and because we can build from a library of pre-built scenarios. We can do these really effectively and efficiently, and we can even help guide you through what you should be doing and how to build that training program, because we've gotten really good with our customers. And I mean, we have hundreds of customers, we have thousands of users in the environment, and we run very large exercises. So we know we can scale, and we know how to do this with even the largest companies. And of course, it's going to greatly reduce all those travel costs, which right now aren't a big deal anyways. That's what I wanted to speak to you about today. I want to thank you all very much for your time. My email's there. If there's anything interesting, questions you have, want to know more, give me feedback, please reach out. I greatly appreciate it. I'll respond to everybody. We have a booth at the event. Please come by and say hi, learn more. We can show you a live demo of the training platform. We can get on a meeting and actually show you a demo of the cyber range, although it's not as interesting to look at. And again, thank you very much for your time.